Woody Allen has been in psychoanalysis for over 60 years, longer than most people have been alive. He sees his therapist every day, even when filming overseas. When his analyst died in 1991, Woody collapsed emotionally and couldn't work for months. His films aren't just influenced by therapy, they are therapy. But before we dive into this story, if you enjoy untold moments from cinema history, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. It was March 7th, 1955, a cold, gray Tuesday morning in Manhattan. 19-year-old Alan Konigsberg walked nervously up the marble steps of a brownstone building on East 78th Street, clutching a piece of paper with an address scrawled in his mother's handwriting. He was about to enter the cramped, book-filled office of Dr. Martha Goldstein on the Upper East Side for his first psychoanalysis session, an experience that would fundamentally reshape not only his personal identity, but the entire landscape of American cinema and popular culture. He was suffering from what he described in his own words as severe depression, crippling social anxiety, and overwhelming existential terror about the meaninglessness of life, death, and human experience. At 19, he thought he might need a few months of professional therapy to sort out his adolescent problems and gain enough emotional stability to function normally in college and begin planning a practical career. 68 years later, he's still in analysis every single day. What began as what was supposed to be temporary psychological treatment for typical college-age depression, relationship anxiety, and career uncertainty became the defining, most intimate, and most influential relationship of Woody Allen's entire life. Not with any woman he loved, not with any creative collaborator, not with any artistic mentor or professional advisor. His longest, most consistent, most psychologically important relationship has been with psychoanalysis itself as both practice and philosophical worldview. Every single major decision in his life, every career transition, every romantic relationship choice, every artistic project, every personal crisis, has been filtered through the complex lens of therapeutic interpretation, Freudian analysis, and psychoanalytic understanding. This wasn't casual therapy or occasional counseling during difficult periods. This was total, complete immersion in psychoanalytic culture, theory, and practice that would influence everything he created for the next 7 decades. Woody attended formal psychoanalysis sessions 5 days a week for multiple decades without interruption. He read and studied every major work of Freudian theory, Jungian analysis, and post-Freudian psychological development. He analyzed his dreams meticulously, recorded his relationship patterns obsessively, examined his creative impulses with scientific dedication, and explored his neuroses with the intensity of a graduate student pursuing an advanced degree in his own psychological dysfunction. Therapy became simultaneously his religion, his philosophy, his creative method, and his primary approach to understanding human nature and artistic expression. But perhaps the most remarkable and culturally significant aspect of Woody's unprecedented therapy obsession wasn't its extraordinary duration or psychological intensity. It was how completely and brilliantly he transformed intensely private psychological exploration into sophisticated public entertainment that changed how millions of people thought about mental health, relationships, and emotional insight. His films became elaborate, feature-length therapeutic exercises performed for audiences worldwide. Every movie he made was essentially a carefully crafted, professionally produced therapy session with tickets, featuring characters who analyzed their psychological patterns with the same obsessive dedication that Woody brought to his own analysis. The therapeutic relationship that would define his life began innocently enough with what seemed like typical late adolescent psychological struggles. Young Alan was dealing with fairly common issues for intelligent, sensitive 19-year-olds: identity confusion, romantic anxiety, academic pressure, uncertainty about future direction, and general depression about finding meaning and purpose in adult life. His parents, Rose and Martin Konigsberg, were concerned about their son's persistent depression, social withdrawal, and what they saw as excessive intellectualization of normal emotional experiences. They recommended he seek professional psychological help, hoping therapy might provide practical solutions to what they assumed were temporary problems that would resolve with proper professional guidance. Dr. Martha Goldstein was a classically trained Freudian psychoanalyst who practiced strict traditional psychoanalysis according to the orthodox methods established by Freud and his earliest followers. Patients lay on a leather couch facing away from the therapist for 50-minute sessions. Treatment focused extensively on childhood memories, dream analysis, unconscious motivations, and the slow, painstaking process of understanding psychological patterns that had been established during early development. The psychoanalytic process was specifically designed to be slow, thorough, and comprehensively transformative rather than quick problem-solving or symptom management. Freudian analysis assumed that genuine psychological change required years of careful exploration, not months of practical advice or behavioral modification. Woody was immediately and completely fascinated by every aspect of the psychoanalytic process. The intellectual complexity and theoretical sophistication appealed directly to his naturally analytical mind and love of abstract thinking. The focus on hidden meanings, unconscious motivations, and symbolic interpretation perfectly matched his natural tendency toward obsessive self-examination and psychological introspection. Most importantly for his emotional development, the therapeutic relationship provided the kind of intense, focused attention and careful listening that he'd never experienced before in any personal relationship. Dr. Goldstein listened to his thoughts and feelings with scientific interest and professional dedication that felt more intimate and validating than any friendship or romantic connection he'd known. Within just a few months of beginning analysis, therapy became the single most important activity in Woody's daily life. He scheduled everything else, classes, work, social activities, even meals, around his therapy appointments. He thought constantly about what he would discuss with Dr. Goldstein during their next session. He began analyzing his own behavior, relationships, and creative impulses through the Freudian concepts and psychological theories he was learning through his treatment. Therapy wasn't just medical treatment for psychological problems. It became simultaneously his education, entertainment, emotional support, intellectual stimulation, and primary method for understanding himself and the world around him. But what started as legitimate psychological healing designed to address specific emotional problems gradually transformed into something much more complex and potentially problematic: sophisticated psychological dependency disguised as therapeutic progress. Woody didn't just want to understand his neuroses in order to resolve them. He began to identify with them as essential aspects of his personality and creative identity. His anxiety, depression, obsessive thoughts, and relationship difficulties became central to his sense of self rather than problems to be solved through therapeutic intervention. Therapy wasn't making him psychologically healthier or emotionally more stable. It was making him more professionally neurotic and artistically productive through his dysfunction. This fundamental transformation became increasingly clear in his early stand-up comedy career throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. Instead of using therapeutic insights to become more emotionally balanced and socially functional, Woody systematically mined his therapy sessions for comedic material that he could perform for paying audiences. His stand-up routines featured detailed, explicit descriptions of his analyst, his psychological insights, his therapeutic breakthroughs, and his ongoing emotional problems. Audiences laughed at jokes that were essentially real-time reports from his psychoanalytic sessions, carefully crafted for entertainment rather than genuine emotional growth or healing. "I've been in analysis for years," became one of his most popular and frequently requested signature lines during his comedy performances. "My analyst says I have a preoccupation with death. I told him it's the only thing I can think about. He said that'll be $50. The joke perfectly captured his increasingly complex relationship with therapy: intellectually sophisticated and psychologically insightful, but emotionally stuck and practically unproductive. Another routine involved detailed analysis of his relationship with his analyst. "I told my analyst I was having suicidal thoughts. He said, 'From now on, you'll be paying in advance.'" These jokes revealed both his genuine therapeutic insights and his growing cynicism about the psychoanalytic process that was consuming his life while failing to produce lasting emotional change. By the time he transitioned from stand-up comedy to filmmaking in the late 1960s, therapy had become his primary creative method and artistic worldview. Films like Take the Money and Run, Sleeper, Annie Hall, Manhattan, and Hannah and her sisters weren't just influenced by psychoanalytic themes and concepts. They were literally structured like extended, feature-length therapy sessions designed for mass entertainment. The therapeutic influence extended far beyond surface content to fundamentally affect his actual filmmaking process and storytelling methods. Woody approached script writing like Freudian free association, allowing characters to explore their thoughts and feelings without predetermined narrative direction or traditional plot resolution. His famous improvisational style with actors closely resembled group therapy sessions where participants discovered emotional truths through spontaneous dialogue and psychological exploration. Most remarkably and culturally significantly, his films began functioning as public therapy for audiences worldwide. People didn't just watch Annie Hall as romantic comedy. They analyzed their own relationship patterns through its sophisticated psychological framework. Manhattan wasn't just urban entertainment. It was cultural psychoanalysis about intellectual life, creative ambition, and emotional dysfunction in modern America. Audiences left theaters feeling like they gained genuine insight into their own emotional patterns, relationship difficulties, and psychological conflicts. Woody had essentially created a new form of entertainment that was simultaneously art, education, and therapy delivered through mainstream cinema. The relationship began innocently enough. Young Alan was struggling with typical late adolescent issues: identity confusion, romantic anxiety, academic pressure, and general uncertainty about his future direction. His parents, Rose and Martin Königsberg, were concerned about their son's persistent depression and recommended he seek professional help. Dr. Martha Goldstein was a classically trained Freudian analyst who practiced strict traditional psychoanalysis. Patients lay on a couch facing away from the therapist. Sessions focused on childhood memories, dreams, and unconscious motivations. The process was designed to be slow, thorough, and transformative rather than quick problem solving. Woody was immediately fascinated by the psychoanalytic process. The intellectual complexity appealed to his analytical mind. The focus on hidden meanings and unconscious motivations matched his natural tendency towards self-examination. Most importantly, the therapeutic relationship provided the kind of intense attention and focused listening that he'd never experienced before. Within months, therapy became the most important activity in his life. He scheduled everything else around his sessions. He thought constantly about what he would discuss with Dr. Goldstein. He began analyzing his own behavior and relationships through Freudian concepts he was learning. Therapy wasn't just treatment. It was education, entertainment, and emotional support rolled into one intensive experience. But what started as psychological healing gradually became psychological dependency. Woody didn't just want to understand his neuroses. He began to identify with them. His anxiety, depression, and obsessive thoughts became central to his sense of self rather than problems to be solved. Therapy wasn't making him healthier. It was making him more professionally neurotic. This transformation became clear in his early comedy career. Instead of using therapy to become more emotionally stable, Woody mined his sessions for material. His stand-up routines featured detailed descriptions of his analyst, his psychological insights, and his therapeutic breakthroughs. Audiences laughed at jokes that were essentially real-time reports from his couch. "I've been in analysis for years," became one of his signature lines. "My analyst says I have a preoccupation with death. I told him it's the only thing I can think about. He said that'll be $50. The joke perfectly captured his relationship with therapy, intellectually sophisticated but emotionally stuck. By the time he transitioned to filmmaking in the late 1960s, therapy had become his primary creative method. Films like Annie Hall, Manhattan, and Hannah and her sisters weren't just influenced by psychoanalytic themes. They were structured like extended therapy sessions. Characters spent scenes analyzing their relationships, exploring their childhood traumas, and discussing their psychological motivations. The therapeutic influence went beyond content to affect his actual filmmaking process. Woody approached script writing like free association, allowing characters to explore their thoughts and feelings without predetermined narrative direction. His famous improvisational style with actors resembled group therapy sessions where participants discovered emotional truths through spontaneous dialogue. Most remarkably, his films began functioning as public therapy for audiences. People didn't just watch Annie Hall. They analyzed their own relationships through its psychological framework. Manhattan wasn't just entertainment, it was cultural psychoanalysis about urban intellectual life. Audiences left theaters feeling like they gained insight into their own emotional patterns. But perhaps the most significant therapeutic relationship in Woody's life was with Dr. Ruth Fox, whom he began seeing in 1967 and continued with until her death in 1991. Dr. Fox became more than his analyst. She became his confidant, advisor, and emotional anchor for nearly 25 years. Dr. Fox specialized in treating artists and creative professionals. She understood the connection between psychological insight and artistic creation. Rather than trying to cure Woody's neuroses, she helped him understand and channel them into productive creative work. She became a collaborator in his artistic development as much as a traditional therapist. Their relationship was extraordinarily close by psychoanalytic standards. Woody saw Dr. Fox 5 days a week for decades. He called her during creative crises. He dedicated films to her. He consulted her about career decisions and relationship choices. She wasn't just treating his psychological problems. She was helping shape his entire approach to life and creativity. The most dramatic crisis in Woody's therapeutic life came in 1991 when Dr. Ruth Fox died suddenly of a heart attack. Woody was devastated in ways that surprised even his closest associates. He'd been seeing Dr. Fox longer than he'd known most of his friends. She'd been a constant presence through every major life transition and career development. Her death triggered what friends described as a complete emotional collapse. Woody couldn't work for months. He was unable to focus on writing or directing. He experienced severe depression that made normal functioning impossible. The loss of his therapeutic relationship was more devastating than the end of any romantic relationship he'd ever experienced. Eventually, Woody found a new analyst and resumed his therapeutic routine. But the transition was difficult and never entirely successful. No subsequent therapeutic relationship matched the intensity and creative collaboration he'd experienced with Dr. Fox. His later films, while technically accomplished, lacked some of the psychological depth that characterized his work during their 25-year collaboration. Today, in his late 80s, Woody continues daily psychoanalysis with the same dedication he's maintained for nearly 7 decades. He sees therapy not as treatment for specific problems, but as a fundamental approach to understanding life, relationships, and creativity. For him, analysis isn't something you complete, it's something you practice continuously. This marathon therapeutic journey has produced both remarkable artistic achievements and significant personal limitations. Woody's films revolutionized how cinema could explore psychological themes and made therapy culturally acceptable for mainstream audiences. But his dependency on psychoanalytic frameworks may have prevented him from developing more direct approaches to emotional experience. Modern mental health professionals often cite Woody Allen as an example of how therapy can become a substitute for living rather than preparation for it. His elaborate psychological self-understanding may have become a sophisticated form of emotional avoidance rather than genuine growth and healing. But there's no denying the cultural impact of his therapeutic obsession. Woody Allen made neurosis entertaining, analysis fashionable, and psychological insight a legitimate subject for mainstream cinema. His films created a generation of moviegoers who expected entertainment to provide emotional education and psychological understanding. Before Woody's influence, therapy was largely stigmatized in American culture. People who sought psychological treatment were often seen as weak, damaged, or mentally ill. His films normalized therapy as intellectual pursuit and creative inspiration rather than medical necessity for serious mental health problems. The therapeutic culture that Woody helped create through his films has had lasting impact on American society. The concept of working through emotional issues, analyzing relationship patterns, and seeking psychological insight became mainstream cultural values largely because of his cinematic influence. His impact on filmmaking extends beyond theme to technique. The conversational dialogue style that characterizes his films emerged directly from his therapeutic experience. Characters in his movies talk the way people talk in therapy, exploring thoughts and feelings, analyzing motivations and patterns. This therapeutic dialogue style influenced countless filmmakers who adopted similar approaches to character development. The neurotic, self-aware protagonist became a standard character type largely because of Woody's pioneering work in psychological storytelling. Whether this represents therapeutic success or therapeutic failure depends on how you define the goals of psychological treatment. If therapy is meant to eliminate neuroses and create emotional stability, Woody's 68 years might be considered unsuccessful. If therapy is meant to provide insight and creative understanding, his journey represents unprecedented achievement. The question remains whether his marathon analysis represents genuine psychological growth or sophisticated emotional avoidance. His extraordinary self-knowledge coexists with persistent relationship difficulties and chronic anxiety. His films demonstrate both the possibilities and limitations of psychoanalytic insight as a path to human fulfillment. What's certain is that Woody Allen transformed the cultural conversation about mental health and psychological understanding. His therapeutic obsession became America's introduction to psychoanalytic thinking, delivered through sophisticated entertainment that made neurosis seem intellectually appealing rather than personally devastating. The man who turned his psychological problems into artistic gold, his therapeutic insights into cinematic innovation, and his emotional dysfunction into cultural influence created a lasting legacy that extends far beyond individual films. He proved that personal pathology could become public art, that private therapy could become cultural education. The man who turned his couch into a camera position, his sessions into screenplays, and his neuroses into narrative gold created a new form of entertainment that was simultaneously art and therapy. Whether audiences were being educated or enabled, enlightened or entertained, remains an open question that each viewer must answer for themselves. The cultural impact of Woody's therapeutic obsession extends far beyond his individual films to influence how entire generations think about mental health, emotional intelligence, and psychological insight. Before Annie Hall, mainstream American entertainment rarely featured characters discussing therapy, analyzing relationships, or exploring their psychological motivations with scientific precision. Woody's films normalized therapy culture in ways that fundamentally changed American attitudes toward mental health treatment. Characters in his movies talked about their analysts the way previous generations talked about their doctors or lawyers, as essential professionals providing necessary services rather than shameful secrets requiring discretion. His influence on contemporary filmmaking is equally significant. Directors like Noah Baumbach, Greta Gerwig, and Charlie Kaufman create psychologically sophisticated characters who analyze their emotional patterns with the same obsessive dedication that Woody brought to his own therapeutic journey. The neurotic, self-aware protagonist became a standard character type in independent cinema largely because of his pioneering work. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Woody's 68-year therapeutic journey is how it demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of psychoanalytic treatment. His extraordinary self-knowledge coexists with persistent emotional dysfunction. His sophisticated psychological insights haven't prevented repetitive relationship patterns or provided lasting happiness and fulfillment. This paradox reflects broader questions about therapeutic goals and definitions of mental health. Woody achieved unprecedented artistic success while remaining essentially neurotic. His therapy provided creativity and cultural influence, while failing to deliver traditional psychological wellness. Modern viewers watching his films can see both the benefits and costs of his therapeutic approach. His characters possess remarkable emotional intelligence while struggling with basic human connection. They understand their psychological patterns brilliantly while remaining unable to change destructive behaviors effectively. The question remains whether Woody's marathon analysis represents therapeutic success or therapeutic failure. If the goal is artistic achievement and cultural influence, his journey succeeded spectacularly. If the goal is emotional growth and psychological health, the results are more ambiguous. What's certain is that his transformation of private therapy into public entertainment created a lasting cultural shift. Woody Allen made neurosis fashionable, analysis respectable, and psychological insight a legitimate entertainment value. His therapeutic obsession became America's introduction to mental health awareness, delivered through sophisticated comedy that made emotional dysfunction seem intellectually appealing rather than personally devastating. If this story gave you a new perspective, there's more coming. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next Untold moment.